All right, good afternoon. It's 3:30. We'll call this afternoon's meeting to order. And we'll start off by roll call, please.
Mrs. Sherling? Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Steen?
Here.
Dr. Mahoney?
Here.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Here.
Mr. Grimberg? Here. Mr. Judd?
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Here.
Mr. Paulson?
Here.
Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Wayland? Mr. Thorsted?
Here.
Mr. Jacobson?
Here.
And I do understand we were to have a couple of on the phone, but maybe we have some technical issues, but they'll let us know if they do join in the meeting. Okay, we'll move on then to the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Rick.
Second.
Okay, second by Chad. Discussions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carried. Approval of the agenda.
Move to approve the order of the agenda. Second.
Second by Chuck. Okay. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carried. PMC report. Good afternoon.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
All right. The activities and accomplishments for the last month were the federal injunction was partially lifted, allowing for work on the core projects and on the Diversion Channel P3 project. There's been continued coordination with the Buffalo Red River Watershed District on the permit review, and a special meeting was held earlier this week. Work with the North Dakota legislature on the funding request continues. There was a revised CLOMAR was submitted to FEMA that was supposed to occur today. Land acquisition is proceeding as scheduled, and there'll be more details on the accomplishments in the Lands Committee report. And then scope development for the next phases of the ag impacts and flowage easement studies continues. For May priority areas, we would like to initiate review of the financial plan with technical and financial advisors, coordinate with a Corps on the commencement of inlet structure construction, get that underway. Continue discussions with local and state permitting agencies, request an extension for the State Water Commission permit for construction. That current permit expires in August, so we're planning ahead. And then award of the work package 50A, which is the demo package, and then continue with land acquisitions and appraisals for remaining property for the channel. The overall program status. Against the $2.75 billion program budget in 2018 dollars, costs to date, expenditures to date have been $468.5 million, leaving $2.3 billion. And then reporting against the quarter one cash budget. The quarter one cash budget was set at $8.5 million. Expenditures to date were a little bit over nearly $15 million, leaving a negative balance. That's due to the fact that more work, particularly on the land acquisition, was able to be achieved in the first quarter than anticipated. And that would be it.
Okay. Any questions on the report? PMC report. Thank you. Okay, moving on to administrative and legal. Anything there, John? Okay. Public outreach. Rocky, were you gonna? Is Roger on the phone too? Okay. Oh, that's right, you're here for Roger, okay.
Apologies. So, Rocky Schneider with AE2S, part of the program management team. I handed this out. It should be in the back of it's an additional laydown at the back of your packet. It's a tour opportunity that we've been working on with several folks up in the Winnipeg area. Their project is set to operate here in a couple days, and we thought it'd be a good learning opportunity and for both the technical and elected folks to go up to Winnipeg. So we had a planned tour next Monday, and right after I laid this down up there, we got an email that the deputy minister has asked us to move it back a week. So for those who've responded, apologies, we're going to move it back and we'll send out new logistics as soon as possible. They wanted to work out some more things on their end, and so I think since they'll be our hosts, we'll accept that obviously and go up there. But I think it's a neat opportunity. Those who have seen it, I've seen it a couple times, but it's always been dry. And so this would be an opportunity to see it in operation and see how it works. And also, we have a couple different stops. I think we're stopping in Morris area up there, which is sort of equivalent to the upstream area here, to talk with some of their leaders about how that works and some of the mitigation and ongoing operations issues they go through. So wanted to let you know that, and then of course let you know that it's been delayed. So the emails you've been getting inviting you, but if that helps your schedules, that'd be great. Please feel free to let Tammy know. She's still the contact on the bottom of that paper. I hope those that signed up can still make it. Otherwise, additional outreach items I think are covered pretty much on the other topics, unless Kevin or Commissioner Campbell wanted to bring up something from yesterday's discussion.
I think the majority of our discussions centered around lands, and I think we can get into that in our lands report. So
We'll say we did shoot a new video with General Semonite when he was here. Those who've done a 3 questions video in the past, we got the opportunity to sit down with him, and it's a pretty neat 5-minute video on the website. If you haven't watched that one, it's an impressive guy.
thank you, Rocky. Mark, do you want anything on the Business Leaders Task Force?
Yes, very proud of the engagement Chamber Business Leaders Task Force has had. We made numerous trips out to Bismarck, and some of the CEOs and some of the young leadership in the Chamber, and continue to be strong supporters of this effort, and very pleased with the work that's taken place to this point. A point of reference being is we're an additional $480 million ahead, new support over the last few months, the $300 million from the federal and $180 million from North Dakota. And you can count on our support being ever present as you work towards a strong completion to this effort.
Thank you. Move into land management.
I'm doing the land management report today. Eric is out of town, so I'll do my best here. There's a map that was also a laydown. This is our land acquisition status map. It's a really good document that is ongoing, that's updated monthly. I think it's one of the neatest sort of, I don't know, dashboard type items we have to see where we're at on the project. The goal is to turn all those boxes green, of course, so you can kind of see where we're at in the different phases of acquisition. I think as mentioned earlier, there's been quite an uptick in land acquisition work. We saw a little uptick obviously on the budget and actual acquisitions, but the early processes of hiring appraisers, and we have several appraisal firms. I think there's 5 different firms that are actively out there working right now. So the full report that land management looked through shows sort of very granular detail the advances we've made on land acquisition. So we expect continue to see that uptick continually increase over the next couple months here.
I know we did talk a little bit about the lands needed for this, the current work that's about to start happening with the diversion inlet structure and the wild rice control structure, and I think we're for the inlet structure, I think we have all the properties necessary for that one, correct?
Correct, yeah. And the wild rice, we were able to buy some of those at auction a couple of years ago, which was sort of a good opportunistic buy at the time. I think there's 2 more parcels I think we need there, according to that other sheet that we're in the process of. And I think the joint board continues to do good work running the lands program for the Diversion Authority, and they're continuing talking to folks and buying land.
If I understand it correctly, there were some more offers made this morning too from?
Yes.
Okay. All right, any questions of Rocky? Thank you, Rocky.
Thank you.
We'll move into finance. Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll just jump right to 8B. B, C, and D largely covered the finance discussion yesterday. So, Gamma, you have 8B, or I'm sorry, Mr. Redlinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Board of Authority. The Finance Committee yesterday considered and recommended the approval of the full cash budget for FY 2019 You'll recall earlier this year and in the end of 18 that we had approved more of a limited service budget while we were still in the stand-down period. And now that we have received some relief from the courts in terms of the injunction, we are proposing that the full cash budget be adopted and that the budget be adjusted. And so that's what the Finance Committee recommended yesterday. In your packet this afternoon is that full cash budget. And so on the recommendation of the Finance Committee, the board is asked to consider that same recommendation and adopt the full cash budget.
I'd make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion for Mr. Grinberg.
Second.
Second for Mr. Steen.
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman. As everyone I'm sure is well aware of, as Mr. Nesbitt shared, we've come a remarkable distance and expect that the Finance Committee and the Diversion Authority is going to get a lot deeper into details as we move forward now that we're going to build a project. And given the commitment from the state of North Dakota to close out where we're at with, as Mark mentioned, the $480 million, we're going to be going to work largely with Jacobs and Mr. Shockley with the teams coming up with some options how we're going to go forward with the bidding in early 2020. And so a lot more detail will be forthcoming. Legislature should adjourn Saturday. I don't think anything will change where we're at now in North Dakota, but you never know. But we'll know for sure 100% Saturday when they adjourn, and then expect over the next 60, 90 days we'll have a lot more details and a lot more information coming forward that align with this year's budget as well as the overall master plan, how we're going to get going. So.
Mr. Steen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification, I asked this question yesterday in finance because I needed clarification for my own self, and this budget is the cash budget for Diversion Authority, does not include the expenditures by the Corps. And so I looked at this expecting significantly more expenditures than what was here, and the Corps' expenditures are outside of our cash budget. Just clarification for everybody.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments on the motion?
Just to that question, Kevin.
Yep.
Tony Grinberger's always talked about, let's know where our cash is, the total cost 2.75, whatever. When does it merge the cores and our money so then we know all of what we're spending in a year?
Rick, do you want to answer that?
It's a great question. I had the same question yesterday, and I believe that's going to be addressed at some point in time by Jacobs soon, within the next 60 to 90 days, I'm hoping. And I'm looking to Kim or Martin or whoever to verify that.
Martin is on his way to the mic.
I see that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Martin Nicholson from Jacobs. Yes, the tracking of the entire program cost is actually covered in the PMC report in some earlier slides. So you do get an integrated look of where you are with all of the core expenditures plus your expenditures. And as you point out, in 60 to 90 days, we'll be back with the financial plan look of how that looks as you move forward from all the other variables that go into that what you're going to have to spend long term.
So when the P3 is bid eventually, will we see those expenditures as they're going out, or will we just be aware of what they're constructing since it's a set bid?
Yes, Mr. Mahoney, the expenditures for the P3 from the Diversions Authority's perspective during construction will be those progress payments. And if you recall from some of the financial presentations, those amount to roughly $700 million or so over the period of construction. So you will see some fairly large outlays of cash during construction to pay for the progress payments on the P3. The availability payments that are the long-term repayment of the debt that the P3 developer brings and all of the construction costs that they will incur starts after construction, and that's those long-term payments for 30 years.
Can I ask, Martin, so the P3, what we've heard is basically a lot of that's going to be bid now next fall and then start next year. Does that sound correct? Is that kind of how, and I guess my question is, do we have to have the full amount of the P3, the funding for that up front? Or can that be also paid as a project goes on? How does that work?
So, and I'll defer to John if he wants to get up and supplement, but the P3 contract is a single contract. They will actually bid the annual payments that they will charge the diversion authority for a 30-year period to pay them back for their debt and equity and all of their construction costs. So what the diversion authority will pay out of pocket for that contract is that $700 million worth of progress payments plus 30 years worth of annual payments to pay them back. What's most important for the P3 developers is certainty that the diversion authority has the wherewithal to cover all those obligations, not only in the short term during construction, but for the 30-year period. I'll let John supplement.
That's correct, and I guess the specifics of that, as Martin mentioned, we'll be working in the next 60 to 90 days to determine what the final financial plan amended will look like, following up from the legislative session and the federal funding. So we'll have more specifics about that, how the contract's going to look, and the bidding time period, and the time in which we think we'll get the contract awarded. And I just wanted to give an update to the board. I just got a text that the Senate Bill 2020, the funding for the diversion has just been signed by the governor, so.
That's awesome. Can I ask one more optimistic question? So let's say hypothetically that we get more federal funding and we have more money available. Could we pay the P3 off, or is it required to go the 30 years? Or do you know what I mean? If we end up having more money available, would that be possible?
Thank you. That's a great question, and we've actually had similar questions like that from legislators. We'll be working through the ability to prepay some of the availability payments during the procurement as we talk to the proposer. So it's certainly an option that we'll look at. We also have other public debt that we'd be issuing for the project, and we'll make sure that those have earlier call dates also. So if we have extra funds coming in either from the federal government or from the state, that we could call those either the P3 debt obligation or the bonds that we've issued early. So.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling? Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Paulson?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland? Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
All right, we'll move into item number 8C.
Item 8C in your packet for $1,006,160.10 to Cass County Joint Water Resources District, Dorsey and Whitney, and Onset Twitchell. I'd move voucher approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Paulson?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland? Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. We'll move into 8D. Mr. Redlinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. 8D is an item to extend the current PMC task order. We're operating under task order number 2. This will be amendment number 3 to that agreement. And what we're going to do is a couple of things. One is change the termination date from April 30 to May 24. That's going to give us time as the co-executive directors as well as the governmental entities to talk about the new task order number 5, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. That will be the successor task order that supplants this one. But this will be a simple extension to May 24 for a $550,000 term. And again, you're going to hear a bit more about this over the next month. We briefed the Finance Committee on this yesterday, and we'll be spending some time with the principals from the Finance Committee as well as the board on the development of Task Order 5. And we'll just briefly summarize that at the end of the meeting today. So on the recommendation of the Finance Committee, the board is requested to approve the extension of Task Order number 2.
Move for approval.
Mr. Grinberg, do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Steen. Further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling? Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Paulson?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, allow me to excuse myself. I am going to go to NDSU. My son is receiving a senior award this afternoon. And so I'm going to go
Congratulations.
give him congratulations and hopefully get a picture with him. Haven't seen him in a week.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a dumb question? First of all, congratulations, Tony. You don't need to stay for the dumb question. Do you remember when we were doing that, where we had the contractors on standby? Can we have, how is that going now? Have they been reactivated? And maybe maybe that topic is going to be covered someplace else, but do you remember that? And then if we were compensating them to be on standby, and then we were hoping that the project would start again?
Okay.
Anybody, John, can you help me with that one?
I can give a brief summary of it. I don't have the specifics in front of me, but I believe what you're referring to is the Corps contractor for the diversion inlet. The Corps did have the Ames construction on standby regarding construction of the inlet. It's my understanding they have notified Ames that they can recommence mobilization. I don't know the specifics of when they would remobilize or what the timeline is with respect to that, but I know that is in process right now.
Thanks, John.
Okay, how about the work order number 5? Are we to take action on that today as well? Okay. Do you want to?
Well, certainly, John's going to take this, I believe, so.
Okay,
John.
all right, John?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Diversion Authority Board. What you have in front of you is Ernst & Young. They have work order number 5. This is a new work order. Their past work order expired. We had a work order in place that is very similar to this, not knowing when we would recommence the P3. This work order assumes resumption of the P3 portion of the project. This is probably one of the first items that we need to stand up. As you've heard Martin and myself say, in the next 60 to 90 days, we're going to be working with the EY very closely to refine the financial plan, get it amended based upon the good news that came out of the federal government, increasing the federal government share by $300 million, and then also increasing the state share currently pledged to $750 million for the project. So we'll be reconfiguring the financial plan, working with them, and then working through the phasing of the P3 contract expenditures so that we can produce an amended plan, and then talking through some of the issues like Commissioner Pepcorn had raised about what if we get additional funding from both the state and federal government, can we prepay portions of that? So this work order envisions that along with the normal work that we have EY do. EY typically only performs work if they're requested, so the budget is higher than what we have typically used from them, but it is a budget amount so that we have sufficient budget. My understanding is this is already programmed into the budget for 2019. So we, with this plan, we're envisioning full procurement restarting later this summer, with next year being the date of award for the P3 contract sometime during 2020. I can certainly answer any questions. There was a question at the Finance Committee regarding the hourly rates and the adjustment. EY typically has been very good to work with. They are allowed to have an adjustment of either the consumer price index or up to 3.5% per year, which is consistent with our other contract clauses that would allow them to request that. To my knowledge, that was not requested in this with this task order, so it's the same hourly rate that you see viewed there. If there's a request that comes in next year, I would bring that to the attention of the board. But once again, they've been very good to work with, and it would be very difficult to bring at this late hour to bring on a new financial advisor, pay them to get up to the same level of knowledge and information as EY.
And this does come with a recommendation to pass through finance?
Finance Committee recommended approval of this, so I'll move to approve work order number 5.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney,
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Judd,
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson,
Aye.
Mr. Paulson,
Aye.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Okay, and we do have action on testing services?
Yes, I believe we should have some action on approving the Braun contract as well. And I think, Kim?
Yep. And this was first brought before the Finance Committee last month. They asked us to come back and provide some additional justification for the rate increase. This would be the first rate increase since 2017 for Braun Intertech, who are currently working on Diversion Authority projects. The rate increase ranges between 1% and 3.5% for the services that they provide for the Diversion Authority contracts. The justification for the rate increase is for they've increased their hourly rates for their employees. The increases also helps to offset the cost of additional health care and employee benefits. And what was the last thing? Offset the cost of increased costs for goods and services as well.
Thank you, Kim.
Can you please mention, too, that they've not had a raise for 3 years?
They haven't had a raise. This would be 2 years. They didn't get a raise last
Thank you.
year.
And this also comes with a recommendation?
Yep. Finance Committee recommended approval, so I'll move to approve.
Hey, we need a second before we can have discussion. Oh, okay, all right, we have the second? Okay, Joel?
Mr. Chair, I guess I just have a question. We get a lot of these that come up from time to time. Maybe I would suggest that the board take some sort of policy stance on how we could escalate these contracts year over year based off of some benchmark or something along those lines. And I guess the second question is all this included in the ultimate budget? I mean, are we anticipating these rate increases year over year as a variable in our budget?
Good questions. Kim, do you?
Yes. Yeah, the rate increases are escalation or for rates are included in, considered in the overall program budget.
Is there any policy position that we as a board have as far as this is concerned? So we don't have to address this every year it comes up?
Yeah, so each of the contracts, I can tell you that the contracts that I'm aware of, there's a clause in the contract that says that each entity is allowed to request a rate increase, an annual rate increase up to an expiration date of the term. So right now, you still have to ask for it. So if you wanted to do an escalation, you can amend all the contracts and put in an escalation clause. You could do that where it's automatic. But right now, they have to come back and ask.
I would assume at one point in time, these services were bid out. Were they not?
For, you mean a competitive procurement to bring them on board?
Yes.
I would assume so.
Okay. So at what point do we have to reconsider rebidding?
So typically, when you're bidding or procuring consultant services, it's based on qualifications, and then the rates are negotiated. And so that's kind of all included in the contract terms. So I'm assuming, and I don't know for sure, but I would assume that the Braun Intertech is probably a negotiated rate. I know ours are. Ours are negotiated rates. So we set the negotiated rate in the master services agreement, and then every year we have to go forward and ask for a new, for an increase. I'm assuming Braun would be the same way. Do you know for sure, Martin? Where's Martin? Whether or not Braun is it negotiated?
Yes. Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Paulson?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes. Kevin, just one
Yes.
question.
Mr. Mahoney.
Mike and Robert have been kind of co-directors on this, and I know these raises have come up all the time as we watch this project go forward. Could the Finance Committee maybe look at that, to Joel's question? Because Moorhead might have a raise in your community at 2%, 3%. We have a raise at 2%. The county has something else, and we sometimes are a little bit variable. But it sometimes seems to some of the commission members that it's higher or lower depending on which field they're in. And I don't know if there's a way to get a policy discussion on that, Joel, just so that when we had a finance, we had a discussion about that, what's reasonable and how do you do it. And I know, Mike, you looked at some stuff on some contracts as well, and you guys renegotiated some stuff. So I guess the question is, are we consistent, or are we following a policy that we have?
Yeah, and I'm in full agreement that we need to escalate these rates year over year. I mean, it's just the cost of doing business and inflation, things go up over time. I'm more looking for stability in our budgeting process to be able to have a little bit more certainty as far as where some of those numbers are going to come in at. So.
Very good. Did you have a
Okay, Mike? Thanks.
I was going to say, Mr. Chair and members of the board, we could certainly have some conversation with board members and the finance committee members about the MSAs. That's really where these allowable increases are contained, is that 3% or that 3.5%, depending on the firm, whether it's HMG, whether it's Brown Intertech, et cetera. And I think if there's a desire for the board to streamline that process and try create more of an administrative review and approval of that, and not see so much of it come back to the board, we could talk about that in future years. Certainly with the hiring of a permanent executive director, that might be a good time to do that, as you're turning over the reins to more of the day-to-day operations to someone to handle that. So I just offer that we're happy to visit with the finance committee and try streamline that if that's of interest. But 3 to 3.5% is typically standard allowable in our MSAs.
That brings us to item number 9. Who's handling item number 9 on preparation? Task orders 5.
You just did that.
We just did it?
Did we?
No, that was work order. This is different.
So, Mr. Chair and members, John and I will tag team on this one. So on task order 5, as I mentioned earlier, that's going to be the new task order for kind of core program management services with Jacobs. And that is one with Jacobs and the AE2S that we've been working on for the last several weeks. We're going to spend some time on that and some real deliberate time over the next month to bring that back to the May Finance Committee as well as the May Board meeting to get that approved. And that's going to be a larger task order that will have quite a few services embedded within it. Now that we're leaving this post-injunction, or now that we're entering this post-injunction time period, so we're definitely going to be spending some time with it, making sure that the elected leaders, the principals, as well as our staff have comfort with that. So that will be next month in May, and then John can talk about task order 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Diversion Authority Board. Task Order 6 will be in regards to Jacob's role in the P3 procurement. Now that we are leaving the post-injunction period and getting through the legislative period in which we increased our funding to the project, we're going to begin the process of recommencing the P3 procurement. During that 60 to 90-day period, we have to work through what the timing of that procurement will be and what the services will be required from Jacobs. The intent is to get a draft of that task order number 6 to the Finance Committee and then the Diversion Board in June. So that would follow on the heels of the task order 5 so that we can stay on schedule for a P3 contract award sometime in 2020.
And so, Mr. Chair and members, no action requested of the board today, just an update and information provided to the Finance Committee and to this group as well today. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll move into item number 10, which is the executive session. Mr. Shockley?
Just need a motion to go into executive session, talk about litigation matters.
Should I read it fast?
Your favorite thing to do, yes.
Yeah, it is. That's why I get the big bucks. I make the motion for the Flood Diversion Board of Authority to meet in executive session on April 25th, 2019 at 4:15 as authorized by the North Dakota Century Code 44-04-19.1, subsections 2 and 9, to consult with its attorneys regarding the ongoing litigation in the matter of Rich and Wilkin JPA and the Minnesota DNR versus the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Fargo-Moorhead Flood Diversion Authority as intervener, civil file number 13-CV-02262-JRT-LIB.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Same sign.
Aye.
Okay, that was a yes. Yeah.
And you will need to come back after executive
Yes,
session to
so
adjourn.
we will come back in session once we're done. So are we going to where?
Tour on Monday, so.
There's Mike. All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, got that?
Was that Rick and Chad?
Yeah.
All right.